Am I sharing my screen now?
Yes, you are.
All right. And am I sharing the correct screen? Even more important, perhaps?
I believe so.
You got the presenter view up.
See, that's what I was worried about. For some reason, even though I selected the other screen, it sometimes decides that it's going to share my other screen. Let's try this again.
In there.
You'd think this far into the pandemic, this would not be such a tricky problem, but desktop 2.
Terry says, at least you don't have a cat face.
All right, how am I doing now? Did I do it correctly or am I still backwards?
Yes.
Excellent.
All right, welcome to How to Create Compelling Proposals That Win with expert Reuben Swartz. Reuben, if you could advance to the next slide, I'll quickly cover the housekeeping items. You're currently in muted mode, but it's up to you to take yourself off mute. We like these events to be more interactive. So speaking of, please participate either by typing into the chat, into the Q&A, or by speaking up or by raising your hand, or just however, because this is an informal webinar and the more dialogue, the better. Which reminds me that the way we've structured this is Reuben's prepared, I don't know, a few slides to maybe get the dialogue going for about the first 15 minutes, but then the rest of it is we're anticipating it to be dialogue and Q&A because that's usually what people find the most helpful as opposed to somebody just droning on and on. Not that Reuben would ever drone, but we want it to be more interactive. All right, so the session is being recorded. You can't do that in stealth mode anymore, so you're all aware of that. We will definitely send you the slides as a follow-up and any notes and a link to the recording. So Reuben, the next slide, I will officially introduce you. So,
awesome.
Reuben is a longtime friend and partner of PICA as the founder of Mimiran CRM. That's how we actually got introduced and how this partnership with PICA got started. He calls it the anti-CRM because he was a solo consultant and he couldn't find a CRM that worked for him. So he's like, heck, I'll just go build one. And so that's how Mimiran was invented. He's also the host and chief nerd. He calls himself of a podcast called Sales for Nerds. If you haven't listened to it, it's always very insightful because it's for people who hate selling. He even actually did an episode with me a few weeks back, which was rather entertaining, I thought. Got me to confess some things I hadn't confessed before, Reuben. He's also the author of a popular course, Sales Proposals the Right Way. Hence, he really knows what he's talking about. So with that, Reuben, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Liz. It's great to be here. And I'm going to run through a bunch of slides and then we'll get into the discussion. I think the main thing is that we tend to build up in our heads that proposals are this awful, icky process. And then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I know I learned how to do proposals from professional salespeople who are really, really good at their jobs, but actually kind of crappy at writing proposals in some ways. And I had to unlearn a lot of things. So my goal for this session is to help you unlearn some of those painful sort of conventional wisdom issues that we can tend to get bogged down in that makes proposals less fun, less effective, take more time, and so on. So I went from, gosh, I hate proposals, it's a necessary evil, to it's actually kind of fun. I went from taking hours or even days to less than an hour to create proposals, from struggling to close 5-figure deals to closing 6-figure deals where people were like, yes, let's get started. And I don't think there's anything that requires a ton of rocket science to do this. One way that I learned to reframe the problem is like, if I was talking to a friend, how would we talk about this? So instead of I'm in sales mode, oh my gosh, and then at least for me, I tended to kind of clam up and get all awkward because I didn't like being in sales mode. I want to be in helping mode. If I can figure out how I would talk to a friend, I would actually ask the right questions and then create the right solution to solve the real problem, as opposed to getting kind of wrapped up in, oh my gosh, I got to be a sales rep. And I think we often think of the goal of the proposal is to win the deal. And if you read a bunch of sales books, that's pretty much what they'll tell you. But really what we want is for the audience member to read through and go, yep, you get it. Great. Now I have the confidence to make the change that you're suggesting and set up a successful project. So the proposal really opens the project. It doesn't, we often talk in sales in terms of closing the deal, but what we're trying to do is open a successful project. That's really what we want to do. And the typical proposal is kind of like, we're so awesome. Here's our solutions, our T's and C's, our story, blah, 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 right? It's all about like a big brochure for the company. But rule number one, a proposal is a story, not a brochure. But unlike a typical story, there's no suspense, right? We're not wondering, does the hero pull it out in the end? All right, here are some examples of stories. And they follow a structure, the hero's journey. That if you guys are Joseph Campbell fans, so many stories follow this particular pattern, and there's nothing particularly rocket sciencey about it. But we want to kind of identify who's the actual hero of the story. And for a long time, I made the mistake of centering technology because I was helping to write proposals for software companies or tools, or heaven forbid, yourself as the vendor, but really the hero is the buyer. And so the story centers around the buyer, and you're there, you're the old man who's very helpful, who gets the hero where they need to go. So rule number two, the buyer is the hero of the story. And so if we kind of color code our proposals in a different way, instead of having a whole bunch of stuff about me, we have a bunch of stuff about the buyer, right? Like it's their story, not ours. And I think that's a real quick, easy way to look at, is this something that's going to resonate with somebody, or is it a bunch of crap about how amazing we are? So what if the hero doesn't like the story very much? Well, usually the problem is that we don't have a compelling villain. And that's rule number three. A good story needs a compelling villain, right? We need a reason that we're going to change. We all have a zillion things that we should be doing. You know, proverbial example, oh, we should all be eating healthier, but somehow we wait till we have a heart attack or some other thing happens to really change what we're doing. And it's not that we are bad people or lazy necessarily or any of those things. It's just there's only so many things we can take on at once. We're all already probably too busy. So what is the compelling villain? What's the real story? So oftentimes there's a problem, there's a technical pain or a symptom, and it doesn't necessarily have to be technical in the sense of it's a computer, but there's something going on that's a symptom that creates some kind of business pain or cost that then creates some kind of real life pain or motivation. So it could be, you know, our computer systems aren't running smoothly. Okay, and that's causing us XYZ loss in dollars, and that's causing me to not get to grow my business to the place I want, and I'm missing out on my kids' soccer games because I'm always trying to debug the technology or whatever it is. So we want to kind of get the story behind the story, and there's a temptation when we hear the technical pain or symptom to say, check, yes, this is someone we can help, but we got to delve in and understand the real villain behind the symptoms. Like, I don't really care about the sword, I just want my kingdom back, right? And if you have a whole proposal about mechanically pulling the sword out of the rock, you may or may not address the real issue. So speaking of hero's journeys, here's how I think of the proposal structure. And don't worry, I will share a link to a template, the template that I literally use, that lots of people have used very successfully. So you can grab that afterwards. But a lot of people put a cover letter on a proposal. I don't. Just one more piece of fluff, like, we're so pleased to present this proposal, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, let's skip that. So I like to have some kind of introduction. There is a cover page, right? Like, here's who's this for, how long it's valid for, what we're trying to do, and so on. The critical part is the situation summary. We're going to set up the story, right? If we don't have that, it's really hard to make everything else coherent. Because if we don't understand the patient's symptoms, the patient's needs, how are we going to devise an effective treatment plan? And how is that going to be compelling to the patient? Once we have that, then we have the solution that resolves the story, the investment, what does it take, some T's and C's, just some simple human readable stuff I would recommend. And then the about me, make it human, right? It's not just about us, especially if you're an independent consultant. Don't pretend that you're a giant corporation. Show that you're a person who's going to give them the kind of service they can't get from a giant corporation. And some kind of signature or e-signature, some way to get started. So literally, like, let's keep it simple. Who's this for? And one key point here is have an expiration date on your proposals. They're not open-ended offers that I'm going to do all these things between now and the end of time whenever you say jump, right? You've got deadlines, your client, your prospect has deadlines. In order to meet those deadlines and make everything work and have everyone function without tremendous amounts of stress, we got to get started by a certain date, which means this proposal expires after a certain date. And I think we all understand the difference between I'm creating an exploding offer because I want to force someone to be uncomfortable and sign on the dotted line versus I want someone to take action at a time that's going to be necessary for us both to be successful. And if you wait till afterwards, then you're not actually going to be able to start. We have to have a different conversation about when we can actually get going, because I have other clients and I have other prospects and so on and so forth. Now, the situation summary, I think, is the piece that a lot of people ignore. And I know I ignored for years or kind of just glossed over it, or I would copy crap from the company's webpage or something like that. Whole bunch of nonsense. But this is the most critical part of the proposal. It sets the stakes. And I like to frame it as something like customer has achieved some kind of success, but now has a problem as a result. And that means that blah, 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 there's consequences, and that leads to deeper, more challenging life consequences. Right? We don't need the whole history of the company here, just the thing that's really driving the action in this particular scene or this particular storyline. And then they've tried various approaches to solve this problem, right? Like probably their first reaction wasn't, oh my goodness, we have a big problem, I'm going to call you. They probably tried to solve it themselves. Maybe they're asking various people, who knows? But those approaches didn't work for whatever reason. Why not, right? We want to make sure we understand that so that we can, one, be sure that we can actually solve the problem and give them confidence that we're going to solve the problem. And then I really like that. There's a sentence there that says, whoever this is, turn to you because of, right? Like, why did they ask you to help? We want to make sure that we understand that. And it's not like we want to fluff ourselves up a little bit, but it's one thing if they say, we really need your help because you're local and the other people aren't local, and we just want someone we can bring into the office when necessary. Or we want someone who has the most experience, or we want someone with a fresh approach, et cetera, et cetera. You can see how, depending on what they really need, they're telling you a lot about what's valuable to them, and also maybe what's not so valuable, what they've been burned by in the past. And that one sentence is so powerful. And of course, the other person reading the proposal that maybe you've been talking to probably knows that already, but it's nice to call it out and make it explicit. But when they circulate it to their team, maybe some of those people don't know kind of really why they're turning to you. And just because you've got that sentence in there doesn't mean that you're automatically the vendor who gets selected, but it helps to highlight what they're getting with you that maybe they're not getting somewhere else, or to contrast what you provide versus situations that have burned them in the past. And helps you kind of set yourself apart, not just in that sentence, but in the rest of the proposal.
Reuben, before
Yes.
you go on, let's pause and see if anybody has any questions specifically on the situation summary, because you covered a lot of details there, a lot of reasons why. I think one of the most important reasons for this section is to ensure that you're on the same page and reflect that you've heard them, that you
Absolutely.
that you
I think
understand
that,
them.
You know, it reminds me of when in a journal article is reviewed and the reviewers, they send back basically a summary of it as well, just to let you know that this is what I understand this article to be. And this is saying the same thing. This is what I understand the situation to be. And it does get you on the same page and put those expectations or understandings out there.
And this is the most important part of the proposal. If you nail this, everything else is going to flow easily for you and flow easily for the prospect. And a lot of times we kind of gloss over this, or we copy and paste some crap from the customer's about page or our about page or whatever. In fact, I have a customer who asked me to review some proposals that he had got for a project. And he was like, yeah, I don't know who to pick. Can you help me? So I'm like, sure. So I look at these proposals and they're all garbage because they are all just about how amazing the vendors are. And there is no situation summary that says, I understand what the heck you're trying to do. Therefore, XYZ. right? It was like, imagine if you went to the doctor and someone's like, you should have knee surgery, you should have heart surgery, you should have shoulder surgery, and I'm a great shoulder surgeon, or I'm a great heart surgeon, or whatever, but with nothing about the symptoms, right? You wouldn't want to deal with that. You got to make it clear to everybody that you understand, here's the common starting point.
Reuben, I just wanted to add in one thing, and it is, and I've made this mistake, so learn from my bad luck. Don't include anything that is not public knowledge. I was preparing a proposal. I had been kind of clued into, the larger scenario that a client had, and I included one element which was not public knowledge. And it wasn't that it got out to anyone, but somebody on the selection committee said, we have to throw this guy out. He obviously has talked to somebody because he mentioned X. And I didn't get that deal because I mentioned X. I thought I was being thorough. I thought I was like demonstrating that I do my research, but instead I kind of jinxed myself. So just make sure that all the information that you provide, particularly in the summary of their issues, does not include knowledge that is not publicly available.
Well, and I think that depends a lot on what type of proposal you're creating. So if you're responding to an RFP and there are certain ground
not
rules,
a problem. Yeah, not a problem. If you've been invited, this was a situation where I and several consultants had been invited to address a particular problem. And, but you're absolutely right. If it's an RFP, that's pretty simple. But the quality work that individual consultants often do and often get a better chance at are specific situations where the company is not going the RFP route. So we don't have to compete against, the Accentures and the Deloittes. We actually can, get our foot in the door and be successful. And that was this kind of a situation. So that's the only thing I was going to say. Thank you.
Well, but the thing I would add to that is you're going to learn a lot in your conversations with the prospect that is not publicly available. I think if it comes from a channel that isn't officially blessed by that prospect, that individual, not the company, then you have to make sure that you're sharing how you got that information before it goes in the proposal. But absolutely, if you're just talking to somebody, you're going to learn a bunch of stuff that isn't public information.
Maybe in the proposal, there's a way to say, to allude to the more sensitive information without actually putting it in the situation summary. Shalonda had raised her hand. Shalonda?
Yes, good afternoon. Reuben, I was listening in the situation summary. You mentioned you mentioned referencing why you were selected. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Well, and of course, at the proposal stage, you're not actually selected yet.
Why they reached out to you?
But
yeah.
Right, they want to talk to you for some reason, and you can even just ask in the conversations, like, why did you reach out to me? What are you looking for? What sets us apart? And then you can learn things like, well, we went with a big firm last time and all they did was run up a bunch of billable hours without really solving our problem. That's just one example, right? But if you have that, that gives you a powerful insight into what they're looking for and what they're hoping to avoid. Or we heard great things from Liz Steblay, or whatever it is, right? It's nice to know why they're talking to you and what that kind of means for what they're looking for in a solution. And a lot of times what they're looking to avoid being burned. Oh, we're looking to you because we're local. I remember I had one prospect that they had such a good handle on the problem. I didn't understand why they were talking to me. And I asked them, I was like, hey, you guys understand all this? And he's like, yeah, it's true. We probably could just do this. We just don't have any time. And we're already overcommitted. My people are on planes all the time. And we told the board that this was going to get done by next quarter. We don't have any bandwidth. And we just want to hand it to someone that we know will just deal with it and have it done. So knowing that, I could craft a proposal that I had confidence in and they had confidence in. Whereas if I had just assumed that they didn't have the skills to do this, for example, then I might have really insulted them and not done a great job.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And it's not like some super tricky sales technique or anything. It's just like a conversation. Like if you were helping a friend, hey, what are you hoping to get from me what's it essential that I provide that maybe you weren't getting, especially if they're making a choice between internal and asking you, right? They're not putting it out to an RFP process. We don't have bandwidth. We don't have anyone with this particular kind of skills. We heard you did great things for XYZ Corp. Whatever it is going to be useful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Reuben.
All right. And the whole idea here, the thing that the overall mistake I made when I started out was, oh my gosh, I got to write a proposal. This is sales. I hate sales. Right. And then everything got awkward and went downhill versus I'm writing the story of how we're solving this problem together. It's just like, it's almost like you write the press release before you launch the project. We're writing the proposal about what we're going to do before we start the project so that we can make sure we just do the project really well, which is the stuff that I care about and the stuff the client cares about, and we can do it really naturally. So then if we tee ourselves up with the right situation summary, then we tie in the solution almost writes itself, right? We know what the big problems are and we don't have to guess. We don't make the prospect guess, like how do all these technical pieces, where technical doesn't necessarily mean technology, but the things that you're doing that they may or may not understand exactly in your terms, how does that fit to my problem, right? It's like if the doctor starts talking about knee surgery and uses a bunch of Latin, I have no idea what the heck they're talking about. And really all it is I want to, I want to be able to play basketball again or whatever it is. And so we want to be real clear about what happens when, who is responsible, what assumptions do we have, right? I'm assuming that you're going to have this data to me by February 22nd. Otherwise, blah, 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 blah. And what's not happening? A lot of times when a proposal gets circulated around, you may have had a lot of conversations with your sponsor and they understand that updating the website, for example, does not include adding the shopping cart, but someone else on the web team sees a proposal for a website and assumes they're getting a new shopping cart or something like that. Let's just be very clear about what's happening, what isn't. Same way we would if we were just talking to a friend. And of course, what are the benefits? What are you actually going to get from doing this? Let's make sure we understand that so that it's compelling. And then the nice thing about, here's the solution, here's what we're going to get. Wow, isn't that amazing? So then when we get to the investment, it ties back to those benefits, ties back to the situation summary, and the investment seems entirely reasonable, not just like, oh my gosh, here's a big price coming out of nowhere. So that lets us go to rule number 4, price based on value. And this is hard, especially if you're used to doing hourly, but there's no, you can't charge more than things are worth anyway. You can only charge less if you do hourly. And sometimes you happen to hit it exactly right. Personally, I don't like the way it puts incentives at cross purposes, right? Like if I could deliver this faster, I would be rewarded less. So if you're not comfortable with pricing based on value yet, that's fine, but I think it's a great place to get to. And then you've got your terms and conditions. And the big thing here is just make it human readable. You can have your lawyer draw it up. In fact, I'll share the template that I use. There'll be a link to that later. And I had a lawyer write it, but it's very human readable. And the whole idea is it protects me, it protects the client. It's not one-sided and they don't have to send it to their lawyer, right? A normal business owner can just read it and say, yep, that's fair, that's great, let's do this. And then next steps. And you notice we've got a little embedded video in here. It's nice if you got your proposals online. Having embedded video is really awesome, especially now that we are doing so many things remotely. It's one of those little silly things that just adds a lot of human element to it. But this is the place where you get to talk about you just for a moment, for a paragraph or two, right? Why you care about what it is you're doing. And instead of like, I'm so awesome, here are all my credentials, and you might list a credential or two here and there, but really think of it as an origin story. Here's how I got to this place so that, you hired me, I'm Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman or whatever it is. Here's the origin story. It's not just a bunch of statistics and letters after your name. And that's really the structure of the proposal. Again, you can grab a template. I'll share a link to that a little bit later. I think the big thing that people sometimes screw up is they hear, can you send me a proposal? And they say, yes, great, because you know that that's an essential piece of the sales process. And I know I've done this before too. And then you go back and you're like scratching your head like, oh my gosh, what do I put in here? How do I populate this scaffold? I don't have the right information. So before we commit to a proposal, we have to know that we have a compelling story. Oftentimes, the biggest thing is that I found was sometimes there isn't a compelling villain, or I didn't understand what the true villain was. And so it was just like a bunch of work that seemed like it might be good, but the kind of thing that they would read it and say like, we've decided not to do that this quarter. We'll call you next quarter, maybe, blah, 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 right? So know that you have a compelling story. And then the second thing is have a scheduled time to present or review the proposal together. If they can't commit to that, then you don't need to commit to putting a proposal together. So that means it doesn't mean you're winning the deal or anything like that. But usually if it's a real buying process, they're going to put half an hour, whatever it takes to review the proposal with you on the calendar. And if they say, well, we'll get back to you on that, and say, okay, great. Let me know when you have that scheduled, and I'll figure out when I'm going to schedule the time to create the proposal. Couple of tips on writing the proposal, right? Take out the jargon, take out the SAT MBA words, take out the adverbs. All the stuff that we were taught was good writing by our English classes in high school to prepare us for the SAT vocab section is just terrible. The only one exception is use the jargon if it's the customer's jargon. So if they talk about the TPS reports, you can talk about the TPS reports. And in terms of aesthetics, unless you're in a visual field, in which case you already know more about this than I will ever know, but think about like Apple versus Michael Bay. Just simple, straightforward. The content is the highlight, not the pixels. And I can't tell you how many hours I would spend, like, oh, should I pick this font or that font, this size, that size? Should I change the color to match my branding and blah, 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 versus what the heck's actually in the story that the prospect's going to care about. So you do this, think about it, instead of closing the deal, think about opening the relationship, right? This is just the starting point. It's not the end goal. And especially for some of us more service-oriented people who don't like selling in the first place, think of it as I'm not selling somebody, I'm just getting to help. And for me, that helped everything go, no pun intended, much more naturally. So to summarize, the proposal is a story, not a brochure. The hero of the proposal is the buyer, not you. And every great story needs a compelling villain. And I will add that you can almost think of the prospect as the author of the proposal. The prospect is the author of the proposal. You are the editor. You're asking them a bunch of questions. You're learning about the symptoms and the underlying causes and this, that, and the other thing and what they needed in a solution. They're telling you, they're basically writing the proposal for you, just in a somewhat disjointed manner probably. And you're going to go in and edit and smooth and add little bits and pieces where your wisdom comes in. Whereas like if you go to the doctor and you're like, doctor, I want to get back on the ski slopes, but my knee's bothering me, blah, 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 blah. If they come back to you with a whole bunch of pages and pages of medical jargon, what is that? Unless you're a doctor, you don't understand what the heck they're talking about. But if they're like, we're going to get you back on the ski slopes, it's going to be awesome. There's going to be some rehab, but you're going to be skiing by next winter, blah, 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 blah. Then you're like, great, sign me up. So the next time someone says, can you send me a proposal? Hopefully you can say, yeah, that'd be great. There's no problem. It'll actually be fun and not stressful. So what's the value in this? First of all, I think there's just tremendous value in thinking that being asked for a proposal should actually be a fun exercise. It shouldn't take a ton of time versus, oh my gosh, I'm going to stress out for a day and then not write a compelling proposal. But numerically, if you think about your number of proposals times your win percentage and the average value is your revenue, and these are just some silly numbers because they're all nice and even, right? If you have 20 proposals, you win a quarter of them at $20,000 a piece, that's $100,000 in revenue. If you can take that win rate to 50%, and I've seen people go from 25% to 75% kind of following this philosophy, and you can increase your average value because you're actually understanding what the real value is, you're more compelling, maybe you offer some different options in the same proposal, like boom, we've just tripled our revenue. Now that's not going to happen overnight, but doubling your win percentage can actually happen depending on how you're writing your proposals now, if you can switch into this customer-centric story format. And then that also lets you go and invest more in getting more leads because each lead is worth so much more, et cetera. So you get the idea. Not something that's going to happen overnight, but something to think about building towards over time. So some things that I just want to share with you before we jump into just raw Q&A. You can get your fill in the blank here proposal template It's the one that you've seen snippets of here. It's the one that I use, the one that I spent years building or unbuilding, depending on how you look at it, at mimiran.com/hero. Check out the Sales for Nerds podcast at salesfornerds.io. You can listen to Liz Steblay on there. If you want to go deeper on proposals, there's a whole course that I created on this. And fortunately, you don't have to buy it. Don't buy it at that Sales for Nerds link. Go to AppSumo, where it's currently 80% off. And if you want to automate proposals and get more leads and track referrals and nail your positioning and a whole lot more with a CRM built specifically for independent consultants, you can do that at mimiran.com. So yeah, Liz, should we just jump into Q&A here?
Yes, we have people put in a lot of questions and areas for discussion. So I'm going to go back to the top, and if I can get my cursor to scroll up there. Okay, so one of the very first questions was around formality. When is a well-written email appropriate versus a PowerPoint versus a Word doc or even a draft of an SOW?
Let's see if I'm understanding that question. We're talking about like sort of the format for the proposal.
Format and formality, right? So like if you just send an email, it's going to be a lot less, it's going to be more informal, right? Than if it's an actual document that they can print out or a PDF with your logo on it. So it's both, I think the question is both about format and formality. And this was from Terry. So Terry, I'll take you off mute. Well, actually, I think you take yourself off mute.
Well, I think there's two things. There's format and sort of the tone, because you can have different format levels of formality in different formats, and there's probably some correlation. But I think it's in everyone's interest when you have a project where people are going to invest time and money to have some kind of quote unquote formal proposal. And that doesn't mean it has to take a long time, right? It can literally take 10, 15 minutes at some cases to create the proposal, send it over, have them read it, say, yep, that's what we talked about, let's go. It doesn't have to be a 50-page, tons of diagrams and so on type exercise. I think it's really helpful when there's money changing hands to have that level of format/formality. That's one of the reasons I have this tool, right? It makes all that fairly easy. I know I have been burned personally by putting things in an email, and then that person left the company, and suddenly, there was nothing ethically wrong with what we did, but we didn't have a good record of what we had agreed to. And some other people were not very happy with the situation through no fault of ours. And we took something that was awesomely successful and turned it into something that was a bit of a slog because I couldn't be bothered. And it was actually the client's suggestion, oh, just send me an email, you're good, right? Because we had a great relationship. And I made that mistake of saying, okay, great, versus here's the document that we can refer to regardless of what happens later. I think there's a time and place to put things in email when you're maybe as a preamble or as questions for discussion. And at some point, I think if there's money changing hands, I like to have something that we can both go back and refer to that says, hey, here's what we agreed to do.
Thanks, Reuben. Totally agree. And just it ties to the format too. So the benefits and drawbacks of the online format channel versus, sending an email where you can kind of, track opens through a CRM even.
Funny you should mention that. So the whole reason that I have that online system is because I wanted to know if and when people were reading my proposals. That was the seed that started all the craziness. And I was sending proposals through email so I could track opens sometimes, because open tracking is a little bit of a fraught situation technologically. But I didn't actually know if people had read the proposal. And so I would be leaving those voicemails like, hey, just wondering if you had any questions on the proposal, blah, 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 right? And it didn't usually go well. By putting the proposal online, you actually know if and when they're reading it, and then you can call, which is game changing, if I may say so myself. It's just awesome.
Okay, Terry had another question, which she'd like, and I'm starting really at the top of the hour with how you guys wrote these in. She asked, would love to hear about good follow-up strategies or timing, and I get asked this a lot in office hours. Is a week too soon to follow up, or it's been 4 days, or it's been 2 weeks? What's the rule of thumb, Reuben, with regarding follow-up and strategies for follow-up?
Well, the first thing is we don't want to even write a proposal till we have a meeting scheduled to go over it together, right? So even though I'm all about the online proposals and technology and this, that, and the other thing, if they can't commit to some kind of meeting to discuss it, then they're not really serious, or they're just too busy and they won't be able to accept it anyway. And that's when you send the proposal out, you bust your butt, you stay up till midnight, and then you're like, I haven't heard anything. What's going on? So I'm told. And I'm told actually by other people that I'm not the only one who's been in that spot. So first thing is we want to make sure we have that meeting set up to review. And a lot of times, if you kind of follow through and tell the prospect story through that, they're going to say, yep, great, let's get started. Done. That's the ideal scenario, of course, and it doesn't always happen that way. Oh, I got to review it with so-and-so, they're out sick, they were supposed to be here, or got to talk to my spouse, partner, Salesforce integrator, whatever it is. And then you end up in that loop. And I think the thing is, when you finish that meeting, if there are follow-on items before they can sign, say, okay, when should we reconvene? Right? So you're not pestering them as a salesperson, you're working with them as a partner, which I know for me, like I'm not good at quote unquote sales. I hate sales, but I'm good at working with people and helping, I like to think. And so I can do that really naturally, and it comes across as effective and authentic because it's me versus here's a really cool script to follow up and try to close this person who hasn't actually signed on the dotted line yet. Now, of course, if you're doing this online, you know when they're reading it, and it creates a good time to call back and just see if they have any questions. But I don't have a, wait 48 hours, wait 36 hours, wait whatever. It's more like do this in collaboration with the prospect so that they're excited to get your call, even if it turns out their hair got on fire and they can't take it, or they haven't actually reviewed the thing they said they were going to do yet. They know that you're following up on your commitments and keeping them accountable, and it's all going to work out well. Now, at some point, one of the reasons we want to have an effective through date in the proposal is like, hey, we're here to meet your deadlines, and that involves a certain timeline. And it's not because we want to create an exploding offer or high pressure sales tactics or any of that stuff. It's just literally, we got to make sure you're successful. I got to make sure my other clients are successful. So I'm making this commitment to you through a certain point in time. And if they go over that expiration date, they can't sign the proposal. They have to ask you to reopen it. And so I think that's the thing that in your conversations, you kind of lay out, here's how the timeline has to work for us to get you the results that you need, right? You want to launch this by the end of Q2, working backwards, we got to start by XYZ, et cetera, et cetera. So there's never any, it's not like a sale, you're not in sales mode. Now, if I was the VP of sales at some really successful company, I'd probably have a whole different answer to that question, but that's not me. And I'm guessing it's not most of the people on the call, right? We're in helping mode, we're in service mode. So it's all, we never have to leave that and go into sales mode. We're just trying to make sure that they're successful.
Thank you. Next question or topic actually is from Matt Weeks. Good to see you, Matt. He says, can we zoom out to the way you've been successful in making the proposal the end or outcome of a completed collaborative questioning about the prospect's pain or unsolved need? Do you have a process or a path or template for this?
Yeah, great question. And we could have a whole day talking about that. I think if you want, you can grab that template and it will kind of show you where you have to fill in some blanks. And the idea there is it's going to guide you to ask the right questions during the sales process, which is really where the magic occurs. That's where the real work happens, where you and the prospect collaboratively create the solution. And then the proposal is basically a summary of that. So you don't have to, when I started, I would go have the meetings, take some notes, and then go off and try to create the proposal as like the separate thing where I was going to wow people with my brilliance. And that's an awful stressful process that is also completely ineffective because I can do a ton of work and they're like, what the heck does this have to do with what I'm talking about? So when you take a look at that template, it's going to tell you some ideas, or it's going to give you some ideas. Here's some of the kind of questions that we need to ask so that I can fill this in. And you can just take it away from there. You can do it in the tool. You can do it in a Word document, whatever it is that you want to do. We just want to be helpful.
Yeah, when I mentioned Reuben, is you mentioned sales process. I never call it a sales process. I call it an intake session, where I'm really just asking a lot of questions so that I can really understand their situation. Because in my world, I try to avoid using the word sales at any way, shape, or form. So that's why I call it the intake session.
I think that's great. And I like to, something that really unlocked things for me was I stopped thinking of it as sales and started thinking of it as helping. It's like, oh, I'm actually good at that. But I have this mental narrative, whether it's true or not, that I suck at sales and I hate sales and don't even want to be good at it. So why am I forcing myself to do that when I could be helping people, which is something I like? And I think, if you think about going to the doctor, they are not trying to sell you something, hopefully, right? If you get the sense the doctor is trying to sell you something so they can pay their kids' tuition, you're going to be out of there. They're asking a bunch of questions, trying to figure out the right prescription or diagnosis so that you can get better. That's what you get to do as well as a consultant.
So Matt Shannon had a request. He says, I would love to see some examples of a full proposal or proposals using this approach. Are there any available to look at with using the template? So in other words, in addition to sharing just the template, can you share with us a sample of a completed one? That's
a great question. And I'm trying to think how much, because in the template that you can grab, there's sort of like some italicized notes about some of the options you could see. But I'm wondering if it would really qualify for what you say. I don't know, grab it and let me know, because that's actually a great idea. I think something else that's important to think about is no matter what, there's always this sort of temptation to say, oh, and I started out the same way. Let me grab a proposal template from Google and start changing some words here and there. And the real thing is, most of those words should actually come from the prospect or the client, right? They're telling you the story. It's their story. And don't get too wrapped up in, well, I read this other thing on the interwebs, or even Reuben told me blah, 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 blah. Take really good notes in your conversations and have a good template, and then stuff will kind of just fit in naturally. And you really have, what you want is the prospect to be reading through and be like, yep, you get it. And what happens too often is people don't write a story, they write a brochure. The client doesn't know what the heck is really going on. And if they're desperate enough, they'll pick the one with the lowest price, or maybe the second lowest price if the lowest one seems too sketchy. And then people say, oh, it's all about price. But in reality, it's like no one gave you any reason to think otherwise, because they didn't make it about you. They centered it on themselves.
As Terry said in the chat earlier, use their own words as much as possible.
Absolutely. You can even think of it as they are the author and you are the editor of the proposal.
So you were showing a sample of the Mimiran template, proposal template. At least I think it was the Mimiran template. You were showing something. And Kevin asked, what is the content of the video at the end of the proposal?
Oh, great question. So I like to include a 15-second video at the end of my proposal. It's like, hey, Liz, I'm so glad we got connected by so-and-so. Hope this proposal covers what we talked about. Let me know if you have any questions. Literally that simple, right? As if we were in a room together. Sometimes we might actually be in a room together, but especially with COVID, there hasn't been a lot of that. And I can't tell you how powerful that is and how much positive feedback I get on that silly little thing. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Like the one I have in my proposal template is my laptop webcam, me at my kitchen table, probably with these headphones in. It's not an audio visual Hollywood production. It's literally just, hey, there is a person here who gives a damn about you and your stuff. And even though you can't be with me in the room right now, there's this video proof that this person exists and really wants to help. And I highly, highly recommend it. Even though if you're like me, you're like, oh my gosh, I look and sound terrible. But chances are the client's going to know what you look and sound like if they work with you. So there's not a whole lot of use in hiding that.
It makes it personal. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, highly recommend.
So Terry had another question. The benefits and/or drawbacks of a proposal that lives online versus sending via email. You may have already talked about this, but did you talk about the pros and cons of the online proposal versus sending it via email?
Well, it's a subject I never get tired of. So I'm always happy to talk about this because for years I sent my proposals via email and then I would leave those voicemails like, hey, just wonder if you had any questions on my proposal. Even when I learned to have a meeting scheduled to go through it, that would get rescheduled half the time. And then I was back in that voicemail hell loop. And I felt like the dorky guy, like calling the girl to ask her to prom and like, do I call her again or not? Like, I don't want her to think I'm not in. What does she think of my message? But I don't want to sound too desperate, et cetera. So the big thing with putting it online is, you know, if and when they're reading it, and you can call. And again, it's kind of like you can use this kind of power for good or for evil. And I like to think of it as we're trying to get this thing done, or decide that we're not going to do it. That's fine too, right? But we just want to do that as efficiently as possible. That's helpful to both sides. So that's the number one thing. Two, people are on all kinds of different devices these days. So when you send a Word document or a PDF or something like that, and some busy buyer is trying to read it on their phone, that's often a really crappy experience for them versus having literally like a web proposal that they can easily read on their any device and sign on any device. You can do things like put video in there. You can do other things like let's let them select different options in the proposal. So, you know, good, better, best, or here's what we think you wanted, plus a, you know, the optional thing that we talked about that you said, well, show me what that would look like. I might want to do that. I might not. Having e-signature is part of the whole thing. It just keeps everything a lot tighter and you know where everything is. So that's for a single proposal. If you have 5 or 10 proposals outstanding, well, what's the status of them, right? I mean, it used to be a nightmare going through email and all that. Well, now you can look at a list and see what's going on. And then something else that clients told me, which I hadn't thought about, which is really interesting, is long after they've signed it and they're now clients, it's really useful to know that they went back and they're looking at it because they're getting ready maybe to sign, to do the final sign off or write the final check, or they're going to present something about this project to their board or something, whatever it is. And they're making sure that everything is done right. And you might want to go back and double check and do everything right as well.
Thank you. Ginny had a question. Which is better, to have one proposed service and one price, or options of services in tiers with levels of pricing?
Well, I think it depends on the situation, and that's the typical consulting answer, right? It depends. Sometimes there is a very clear thing, like if you're gonna do this, we're gonna go down this path, it's gonna cost you this much. That's great, right? Other times it's not entirely clear. Even if you have these collaborative discussions, I think we've probably all been in situations where we wanted to buy something and we're not exactly sure what we want to buy because it kind of depends on the cost and the options. Think about like remodeling your house or something like that, right? Like, oh, I'm going to put a deck, and do I, you know, add the fire pit or not? And like, there's a lot of reasons that we might want to look at a menu or even say, okay, well, I want package B plus part of package C, but not the whole of package C. So it's just a way to give people more choices and help with that collaboration. Because I think it's important that we do most of the stuff before we say, and here's what everything costs. But at some point, we got to look at, well, what do things cost and does this make sense? And I think we've all been there as buyers where once we see that, we want to make some adjustments, and that's fine too. And I think it's also important because when we're sending a proposal, if we price ourselves out of the deal because we only give one option, well, that's unfortunate, right? Like maybe we really were the best solution for the client if we had given a more stripped down version. Or maybe we left a ton of money and value and helping on the table because we didn't bother to show them what else we could do if they really wanted to invest more deeply. And so giving these options is just a way to help clarify, let the prospect do what's right for them. And I think the way I like to think of it is, I'm going to put this proposal together and I'm going to be happy whichever option they choose. That's my job, right? To be happy with what they pick. If I create some option and I'm like, oh, I'm really upset that they picked that one, I didn't do a good job setting up my options. And obviously it's nice if they pick the really big jumbo package that keeps us busy for 6 months and pays lots of money, but we should be happy if they pick the stripped down one, because they're going to get tremendous value, maybe come back to us for more, and we're not going to have to do so much work, et cetera.
Thank you. Kevin asked a question that I know you're going to love to answer. He wants to know, where is the online proposal stored? Did I miss that detail? Is it a service, an app, a tool?
Sure. And sorry, I was trying not to get too deep into my stuff, but my CRM, Mimiran, stores the proposal in the cloud. And that's how it's able to serve things up on any device and do the e-signature. And also, perhaps most importantly, tell you when people are reading it and let you see, you know, when did people last read this, that, and the other thing. Now you have the option of letting people generate a PDF, which I usually allow for proposals. Sometimes people just want to print something out and you'll get a notification that someone generated a PDF. But of course, once they've done that, we don't know what they did with that later.
Okay, I think we worked through most, if not all of the questions you guys put in chat. Any other last minute things? Matt, you put something in chat, but I wasn't sure if it was a question or just a comment. You said, oh, you're okay. Dre, you said you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And wonderful presentation, Reuben. I'm just curious, you know, when I consult with people and I'm talking about, hey, what are you doing? And they're telling me about their sales efforts and things like that. I always say, well, give me the so what. Maybe you can give us the so what. How much business were you doing before you implemented this formalized proposal system? And how much are you doing now? I mean, not exact numbers, but what order of magnitude did you achieve in your success?
Great question. And I don't have a simple answer to that because it wasn't getting to this place took me years, I'm embarrassed to say, and you guys can literally grab the template and go there this afternoon. But I think the thing that I remember more than anything else was I would go into these sales meetings, have these big conversations, hair would fall out writing the proposals, and then we would have to discuss them. And I realized after a while that basically all these conversations were the same. They were like, wait, you know, we had these awesome conversations, and then I read this proposal and I don't understand how it ties back to our conversations. Can you explain it to me again like you did in the conversations? And I was like, maybe I should just get rid of all the crap and the jargon and just recapitulate the conversation. Like, why can't I do that? And I went from, you know, closing, I would say somewhere around a third of my deals to closing about 80% of them. And those numbers are not exact, I don't know, but I have seen other people replicate those results. Because what would happen before is the buyer would get 3 or 4 proposals. They tend to all be crappy brochures. So they, you know, they throw a dart at the wall, or they pick the lowest price or the second lowest price or whatever, and everyone's unhappy, right? The buyer's unhappy that the proposals are crap and they don't know if someone's really solving their problem. The sellers are unhappy. They spent all this time and, oh, it's just about price anyway when no one cares. If you can actually say, I get your freaking story and I'm going to solve your problem, help you solve it, suddenly a lot of those price objections and the other things go by the wayside, and they're much happier and you're much happier. It doesn't mean you're going to win every single deal, but just this simple change of framework. And I'm not talking about what you may or may not be doing with your proposal, but I've seen again and again and again these things that are just narcissistic brochures. And I say that as someone who sent out a lot of narcissistic brochures and called them proposals. Like, let's just be helpful to people. I think it's what we as consultants want to do anyway, right?
Ginny had raised her hand. Ginny, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I was just trying to get some clarity. If you had someone that you hadn't connected with, they haven't asked for a proposal, but you kind of want to reach out to them and ask them to allow you to give them the proposal with all the further details. Is there a particular strategy for like cold calling a client to offer your services, to ask for them to allow you to give them a proposal?
My personal recommendation would be don't.
Okay.
Like, it's one thing if you have like a click to add to cart kind of offering, right? Then you can say, hey, here's my offering, click if you want it. But when we're talking about a proposal, we're talking about something that's a more complex, customized solution. I mean, I get unsolicited proposals from people. What happens to all of them? They get deleted. Because one, even if I wanted it, they're not going to know what my actual needs are. And so I think it's totally fine to say, hey, let's do some cold outreach. But instead of saying, hey, I'm going to propose this to you, you know, the way I like to think of it is, here's some tips that might help you with this if you're my ideal prospect. So, you know, another part of my CRM, lead magnets. Here's the 8 ways to, you know, write better proposals, or whatever it is that your ideal client wants to solve. that's something that they can digest right away and say, oh, great. You really know what you're talking about. You're super helpful. I might like to have a conversation with you about my problems in this area versus here's a
Gotcha.
proposal.
Yeah. Thank you. Great information.
All right, we're coming up on the top of the hour. So just wanted to wrap up and say that I will be getting these notes out to you probably tomorrow because it takes us a little while to upload the recording and all that nonsense. But definitely check out Mimiran. And there's an off-topic question for you, Reuben, from Dave. He wanted to know about, well, now, hold on, I got to scroll back up. How do you like the Fathom note taker? And do clients ever think it's weird? Because he just signed up for a competitor called Fireflies.
I got turned on to it by somebody that I was with, and I really like it. And I mean, the privacy implications are a little bit scary to me, but they're already scary with Zoom. So I'm not sure that Fathom really like adds any more problems to that. But I love being able to highlight key points in a conversation, and then of course getting the transcript. Because what often happens is like, okay, we do the Zoom meeting, we record it, that's great. Now I have like an hour or whatever it is of video. And I know at some point, probably not quite at the middle or not quite at the end, Liz said something really cool that I want to reference, or there's an action item or something like that. But it's so painful to go find it, even if you have a transcript, versus being able to kind of bookmark it in the thing. And so what I love to do is I literally have Fathom do my note taking basically, and then I'll just copy and paste the transcript into my CRM as the notes. And I have this really rich note taking. And then I can also share that transcript and the video with the other person or people on the call. So we have this sort of joint powerful record that goes beyond just, here's an hour-long block of video. And one more thing, Liz, I want to point out, PICA members can get a discount on Mimiran, right?
Yes.
So if you're a member, there's
still willing to do that.
You can, there's a code somewhere that I don't have access to that PICA members have access to that gives you a discount.
I'll send it in the follow-up email. And Terry says, what's the code? What's the code? I'm not going to go look it up right now, but I promise to send it in the email. All right.
If people have more questions, Liz, I don't know what your schedule is or whatever. I've got a little bit of time if people need me. If not, happy to go, but I didn't want to jump off if people had burning questions that we didn't get to.
Well, why don't we stop the recording? And sometimes people feel more free to ask questions when they're not being recorded. And yes, I can hang out for a couple of minutes.